Today I'm talking about my favorite way to become hopelessly bitter: online dating. It's been a long time since I've used a dating app, waded through those festering trenches, but I vividly remember using them. I remember initially how exciting it all felt to be putting myself out there amongst a vast sea of possible partners. But this excitement quickly turned to impatience, then to uncertainty, and eventually disillusionment. The endless faces became a blur. At a certain point, they looked less like humans and more like items for sale. Products on an endless shelf that for some reason all had the same item description. Products that somehow always managed to turn the table and insist it was actually they were shopping for. So I needed to impress them, entertain them, and always somehow prove I wasn't actually a murderer. I had grown bitter. The process was too gradual for me to notice at the time, but one day I snapped out of my stupor and realized online dating was ruining my mental health. Being content in a relationship now, I want to come back to this topic with a proper perspective. I want to know what happened. I want to know why so many others seem to have had a similar experience. And I'd like to know if this was a flaw of mine or if online dating breeds bitterness. So put your boots on, because we're going in. It's become popular to think of dating apps as little more than avenues for casual sex. But that's not what the data tells us. Multiple studies have shown that the majority of users, even on apps like Tinder, participate in online dating in order to find long-term romantic partners. Sure, some use online dating for casual sex, but they are the minority. Most humans want to find that special someone, and whether we're meeting people online or in person, we continue to want what we want. So, what do we want? Well, in broad strokes, when looking for a long-term partner, men and women are very similar in what they want. They want commitment, reliability, kindness, and agreeableness. Oh, and of course, good genes. Everyone is essentially looking for the same thing, so you'd think dating wouldn't be such a clusterfuck. But human attraction is incredibly nuanced. Everything is a variable, from religion to sleeping habits, and quite simply, we need a wealth of information about someone to determine if they're right for us. And this is where online dating, right from the start, fails us. Streamlining the process of choosing a partner robs us of information. Information that would be immediately apparent if we had met these potential partners in person. Face-to-face communication has a lot of cues we pick up on even subconsciously, which allow us to paint a picture of someone as we get to know them. Computer-mediated communication, like online dating, has a substantial lack of cues. There's no body posture, facial expression, tone of voice, etc. And this absence of cues creates a problem. Because there's not many, the cues that do exist become amplified to fill the void of knowledge. This is why grammar, punctuation, spelling, and even emoji use are neurotically picked apart by those online. They are the cues, the only cues of CMC. This unfortunately leads to overanalyzing, like trying to decipher why someone would use 3 exclamation marks instead of 1. And this is totally unproductive. We don't know if someone uses the same CMC cues as us, or even if they understand them the same way. So overanalyzing frequently leads to misunderstanding, or even worse, catastrophizing. Like thinking the other person hates us because they didn't include an LOL or haha in their response. Another problem with online dating cues is that we have total control of them. Online dating allows us to self-censor very easily. We can always put the best version of ourselves forward. Our profiles can be meticulously perfected, showing all the right angles, saying all the right things. The same goes for our communication as well. We're so used to self-censoring at this point that we often don't think twice about it. That is, until we have to communicate spontaneously. I'm sure many of us find phone calls assaulting. Even if you're like me and grew up in the days of house phones, speaking on the phone now can bring a sense of anxiety. And that's because CMC has spoiled us. Through text, we're always able to cultivate our presentation, take time to word things just right. But phone calls put us on the spot. And although telecommunication doesn't contain as many cues as face-to-face communication, phone calls still provide more genuine cues that show our real selves than CMC. In essence, when we're chatting with someone through a dating app, we're only receiving the best that person has to offer, or what they think is their best. And this leads to the worst problem online dating cues create. When we get to know someone, we don't wait to form an understanding of them. We don't slowly build an image as we receive new information. Instead, our brains race to the finish and paint a picture of someone as fast as possible. We fill in all the blanks ourselves, and interestingly, our brains tend to default to positive characteristics. This is why when we meet new people, we are so quick to think of them as nice, friendly, or trustworthy. Only as we get to know them better do we start to notice all the traits we dislike or annoy us. Because online dating has such few cues to work with, and the cues are already positively curated by the sender, our brains tend to fill in a grossly exaggerated picture of who these people are. We paint them as a more attractive person than they actually are. And this has a huge drawback, because when two online daters finally meet up face-to-face, they're confronted with a plethora of flaws they didn't account for. Neither party can live up to the idealized version the other person imagined. All our carefully curated cues become worthless face-to-face. Instead, we have to be our spontaneous, unregulated selves. As you can see, online dating just by design is already going to be a struggle, and this breeds a certain amount of frustration. Not a lot, but enough to start drawing lines in the sand. For example, after going on one too many dates and being disappointed with who showed up, you might start including criteria in your profile. Perhaps requesting only those who are 420 friendly, only accepting dates from those who don't have kids, or even posting a height requirement. With only a few pictures in CMC to go on, it's not surprising many feel disappointed or even deceived by their dates. But as we search for ways to insulate ourselves from those we don't want to attract, we often forget there are qualities we have that others don't want to attract. So we need to talk about some hard truths. Sexual strategies theory was developed in 1993 by David Buss and David Schmidt. It's a continuation of sexual selection theory, which was started by Charles Darwin. So at its heart, it's all about survival of the fittest, what humans look for in a mate in order to ensure the survival of their genes. A lot of SST will seem common sense, but for those of you who find themselves getting upset as I go over it, just remember, it's not describing you personally. We all come in unique flavors. It's just general psychology for us as a species. SST has a foundation of data behind it, so it's important to consider. As mentioned previously, both men and women seek commitment, reliability, kindness, agreeableness, and good genes. But outside of these, each sex has vastly different qualities they look for. SST believes that these differences simply boil down to our biological minimum investment required to produce a child, which for women is rather high at 9 months, and men extremely low at little more than a few minutes. These investments have an enormous impact on sexual strategies for both short and long-term relationships, because the risk for picking a poor mate is so different for men and women. It's no surprise then that men, having a low risk, are far more proactive in seeking sexual relationships. Women, having a high risk, engage potential partners more cautiously. A study conducted on over 500,000 online dating users in Boston and San Diego confirmed this. It found that men messaged 12.5% of the profiles they viewed, and women only 9%. Stats from Are You Interested are even more pronounced. According to their data, a woman would only need to send 25 messages out to be 99% sure they'd get at least one response. Men would need to send 114. This isn't just a feature of online dating. Even speed dating events found that women approach fewer mates. This is just the general strategy of men and women, and we see this echoed in pop culture constantly. It's where the hound dog trope for men comes from, and the patient virgin woman. The risks are low for men and high for women. Men not having to invest much to create a child means they are highly motivated by short-term sex. Their short-term dating strategy involves looking for cues that signal easy sexual accessibility, essentially partners with whom it would not be difficult to bed. And if a partner can show they don't require a lot of investment or commitment, even better. Male short-term strategy is all about low effort, easy accessibility with no strings. Female short-term strategy is more complicated, as expected due to the risk of raising a child alone. Women look for high-quality genes from whom they can secure immediate access to resources, ensuring their security should their partner leave. Another important aspect of female short-term strategy is cultivating backup mates. This gives them an exit strategy if caught in an unhappy or dangerous relationship. This also gives them an ability to trade up, so to speak, for a better partner. The downside of this is having to continually cultivate backups and the distress felt when backups leave for someone else. Both male and female short-term strategies can sound downright selfish, and simply put, they are. But evolution isn't about being nice or doing the right thing. It's pure survival, and this is both genders' best strategic move. With the invention of contraceptives, a lot of these strategies are outdated, but evolution doesn't work fast enough to account for that, so we still see these strategies being used. It's why certain stereotypes of men and women exist, like how men are afraid of commitment. This is even where the idea of the friend zone comes from. It was originally meant to describe being designated a backup mate. The long-term strategy of both is less appalling. Men are primarily concerned with fertility. Since ovulation isn't really a thing we can tell by looking at someone, men rely on physical cues. Fertility is highly dependent on age, so youthfulness is prized. Another valued trait is physical attractiveness, as it tends to signal good health. Other attributes, such as waist-to-hip ratio and large breasts, are also suspected of being linked to fertility, as found by this study. But don't put too much stock in that, as the sample size was rather small. The point is that men prioritize youth and attractiveness far more than women. Men also place a tremendous importance on fidelity, both past promiscuity and future commitment. Out of fear, they will raise a child that's not theirs. This fear is what's behind jealousy and controlling behaviors that are found so often in men in long-term relationships, not to mention men who have a hard time getting over the past sexual experiences of their partner. Female long-term strategy prioritizes resources and investment. Women value goods and the qualities that ensure those goods far more than men, meaning a partner with a high social status, lucrative career, or just ambition would be attractive, as they can ensure being taken care of. However, they also need to be sure that those resources will be invested in them and not a rival female, so this explains the custom of gift-giving to women. It would be a proud signal to others, especially other women, that their partner is investing their resources in them. Women evolutionarily also had to be concerned with protection. They needed to be wary of other men, so they needed a partner that could protect them. This means physical attributes such as athletic prowess and tallness are highly sought after. So if any of you men out there want the answer to the never-ending question, do women care about height? Statistically speaking, yes they do. And actually, statistically speaking, you do too. Keep in mind as we go through these statistics that everyone falls on a bell curve. But if you believe in evolution, you know there are biological drivers for men and women that determine attraction. And this is some helpful data to back up the SST. Height. Women prefer men who are taller than themselves by at least 2 inches, even more so if they're 5 or more inches taller. Men prefer women who are shorter than themselves. Women show little interest in men shorter than themselves, and men show little interest in women taller than themselves. Age. Men prefer women 5 to 9 years younger, and women prefer men 5 to 9 years older. Looks. Men do place a stronger importance on looks, but quantitatively, not by much. Income. Both men and women prefer high-income partners over low-income, no real surprise there, but the preference is more pronounced for women. Occupation. Men don't seem to have any real preference for their partner's occupation, but for women, it's a strong attractor. Relative to normal rates, women are 8.6% more likely to reach out to men who work as an attorney, 7.7% more likely for law enforcement/firefighter, 6.7% for military men, and 5% for men who work in healthcare. Wait, BMI is a strong predictor for both sexes. Women prefer men with a higher BMI than their own, and dislike men with a lower BMI. Men prefer women with a lower BMI than their own, and dislike women with a higher BMI. Race. As uncomfortable as it may be to talk about, race is a strong predictor in attraction, and is an important variable in online dating. Despite 80.3% of men and 54.7% of women stating that the race of their potential partner doesn't matter, strong same-race preferences are found. What can we gather from these stats? Well, for one, there's certainly a trend. It seems for every preference a sex has, there's a complementary preference in the opposite sex, almost as if, as a species, our innate desires are suited to match each other. There's nothing wrong with these preferences. They did a tremendous job in getting us to where we are. The only issue I see is that, well, we all can't fall in the middle of the bell curve. We can't all be lucky enough to be average, let alone above average. There's a phenomenon called illusory superiority. Basically, it states that people often overestimate their positive attributes. An American online survey found that 69% of men and 67% of women, when asked to rate themselves in attractiveness from 0 to 10, rated themselves as 6 or higher, the most common ranking being a 7. Only 18% of women and 17% of men rated themselves as a 4 or lower. We know that attractiveness of a given population will always form a bell curve, so this survey either grabbed a lot of attractive participants, or many Americans are suffering from illusory superiority. Usually, there would be no problem with this. We will rarely, if ever, encounter someone in real life cruel enough to be brutally honest with us, someone who will judge us objectively. But when we go online and interact with strangers, we will. Strangers are brutal. We all know this. We've all used the internet. But a lot of anger stemming from online dating seems to revolve around being judged this way. Judged by our jobs, our wealth, our looks, our race. And we find out we're not as far up the bell curve as we thought, and we're surprised by just how important others consider these qualities. We don't face these hurdles when we date in real life because it turns out most people have no idea what they want. When we meet partners organically, we actually fall in love with qualities we'd never have expected. Our partners rarely line up with what we imagine our ideal mate to be. However, if you set up dating like searching for real estate, users end up relying on this ideal mate criteria. For example, if we demand our future house have 2.5 baths, we forego the lovely cottage with 1.5 that we'd have fallen madly in love with. We shoot ourselves in the foot when we post any sort of requirement because there's no predicting what will sweep us off our feet. Before any emotional investment, we are allowed to eliminate any partner with a low stat we don't like. So if you don't want to date a short guy or an older woman, you can just filter out those matches. You might have just eliminated your soulmate, but they're not real people yet, just figures, stats and numbers. This is why superficial stats are so profound in online dating. It's all we have to go on from the start. So we all end up becoming extremely shallow when online dating. If you've hung around enough on social media sites discussing online dating, you've likely encountered a few bitter individuals reciting the stats from a study entitled Tinder Experiments 2. This is a blog post that attempted to pass itself off as a genuine research article by including headings like abstract and including a graph made in MS Paint. But don't be fooled. This research is nothing more than a personal experiment looking to prove a personal opinion. It claimed that 80% of men are competing for the bottom 22% of women, while the top 78% of women were competing for the top 20% of men. The too long didn't read being, men don't even try. Women only want to date the alphas. I'm not going to take the time to pick this study apart because it wasn't made to trick anyone who wanted actual research. It was made to fool those who already held that particular opinion. In reality, we are all going after the alphas, both women and men. An actual study, pulling data from 4 cities, found that both genders are punching up online. They ranked profiles in attractiveness and found that men and women sent messages to potential partners roughly 25% more attractive than themselves, meaning everyone is trying to get with someone out of their league. Both sexes were only messaging potential partners further up in ranking. To give some perspective, the most popular individual in the study was a 30-year-old woman living in New York. She received 1,504 messages throughout the study, equivalent to one message, day and night, every 30 minutes for a month. Now, you don't need to be a math wizard like myself to gather that 99% of those messages are from dudes or girls who had no chance in hell of getting a date. I can immediately sense the logic. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. But that's not a good strategy for finding a long-term partner. Let's take all this information and create an average online dating user. This average user is, by definition, ranked 5 out of 10 in attractiveness. They believe they are a 7 because of illusory superiority and send the majority of their messages to 9s and 10s because they're shooting for someone 25% more attractive. They receive only messages from 2s and 3s because everyone is adopting the same strategy, and this ends up eroding their confidence because they only see messages from those they deem undesirable. Their chance of finding a good match is already low, but it gets even worse because they include ideal mate criteria as a barrier for entry. I am assuming a lot for this average user, but it helps me illustrate just how bad the design currently is for online dating. What it all comes down to is online dating is set up like a market, and bringing a consumer mentality to dating is a really bad idea. It has a nasty effect on our sexual strategies. Men who have always casted a large net begin casting an enormous net. I have heard time and time again of men swiping right on every single profile. And although this works well for their short-term strategy, their long-term strategy has them chasing only the most desirable profiles. This is how you get 1,504 messages a month. Women, on the other hand, become far more picky. A study from 2019 found that over the course of swiping through profiles, the chance of a woman accepting a match dropped by 27% from the first profile to the last. They increase their rejection rate and fall into what has been dubbed a rejection mindset. Online dating shows us there are a ridiculous amount of fish in the sea, so our consequence for closing the door on a potential partner is nearly non-existent. So we begin to hold out for only the cream of the crop, those with the highest stats. This is why the rule of being attractive is often joked about, because those who are average to below average are often overlooked. They are the products who collect dust on the shelf. This can make us depressed, make us bitter. We can even misplace this frustration, start resenting the opposite sex for devaluing us. But there's nothing wrong with men, women, or their preferences. The problem is online dating. We were never meant to judge each other like hunks of meat at a wet market. We don't have to use dating apps. No one's forcing us to. But as the world becomes increasingly more isolated, we may find it difficult to wait for a chance encounter. Personally, I'd love to see Zoom speed dating take off as the new norm. It fixes a ton of problems. It limits the number of potential partners, therefore making you invest and consider each match seriously. It's a live webcam, so it has a wealth of cues that help us get to know someone, and forcing a conversation also makes us think of each other as people, not just facts and figures. I'm sure that idea will scare a lot of you. I know it makes me nervous. We'd have to be spontaneous, organic. We couldn't hide behind our screens, behind our CMC. But sometimes we need to do what's good for us, even if it's more difficult. Dating apps appeal to our base desires. They're low stress, they let us be choosy, and the options are plentiful. It's a consumer-focused design, and that's terrible for dating.